We launched 18F during my GSA reign of terror to try to give government agencies a little bit of additional expertise and horsepower in making the decisions necessary to make consequential and substantial investments in technology.
Today on the Daily Scoop podcast from the Scoop News Group, trying to make sense of the elimination of 18F. Former GSA Administrator Dan Tangherlini discusses the termination of the GSA tech team. It's Tuesday, March 11th, 2025. Welcome to the Daily Scoop podcast, where you'll hear the latest news and trends facing government leaders. I'm the host of the Daily Scoop podcast, Billy Mitchell. Thanks so much for joining me. Let's dive into the day's top headlines. Roughly a month after being replaced as acting CIO of the Department of Energy, Principal Deputy CIO Dawn Zimmer is now back serving in the department's top IT role. Zimmer is filling the CIO position for the second time since Inauguration Day after Ryan Riedel briefly took on the role overseeing the department's $4.3 billion IT portfolio in early February. As FedScoop first reported, Zimmer returned to her primary role as Principal Deputy CIO at Energy when Riedel, previously a network engineer at Elon Musk-owned SpaceX, was appointed to the CIO role. She took over the acting CIO role after Biden administration Energy CIO Ann Duncan stepped down at the change of administration. Riedel's appointment came amid reports that members of the Musk-led Department of Government Efficiency entered the Department of Energy and accessed its IT systems. The DOJ also fired hundreds of members of the DOE House National Nuclear Security Administration before backtracking on that decision and reinstating most of the employees. It's unclear why Riedel departed the role after just over a month. The Department of Energy did not return questions about his short tenure. In other news, President Donald Trump nominated Sean Plankey to head the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency on Tuesday, the last major piece to fall into place for cybersecurity leadership in his administration. Plankey served in the first Trump administration, holding a few posts with cyber responsibilities. He was Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Energy Department's Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response in 2019 and 2020. Before that, he was Director of Cyber Policy at the National Security Council, starting in 2018. He has most recently been at the global security advisory company WTW. Plankey was briefly under consideration in 2020 to lead the agency he's now nominated to be director of after Trump forced Chris Krebs out of the role. He had long been thought to be Trump's pick this time around as well. His nomination will now be moved before the Senate Homeland Security Committee, and if confirmed, Plankey would inherit an agency under new pressure in the Trump administration with some of its responsibilities curtailed and some of its personnel eliminated. He would at least have, though, one key deputy, with Karen Evans already in place as Executive Assistant Director for Cybersecurity at CISA. For more news at the intersection of the federal government and technology, make sure to visit fedscoop.com. Early in the morning on March 1st, without any notice, the General Services Administration eliminated its 18F program, what was an internal team of tech consultants and engineers that developed open source tools to improve digital services across the federal government. Named after GSA's 1800 F Street headquarters and just short of its 11th birthday, 18F had grown to be a staple in the federal government's digital services development and acquisition space. But now when you type in 18f.gov to visit its website, you're met with an error message. The team has been completely wiped from the face of the federal government. GSA hasn't given much reasoning for the termination. Thomas Shedd, head of the agency's Technology Transformation Services organization that housed 18F, said during a town hall last week that the decision was based purely on its reported cash flow struggles and that it hadn't been cost recoverable. Dan Tangherlini, former GSA administrator when 18F was founded, now joins the Daily Scoop to share his thoughts on what 18F meant to good government, the legacy of the organization, and how GSA will continue to serve as the federal government's center of tech excellence without this key team moving forward. It's good to see you, Dan. It's been a few years, and I think as we jumped on the call, I think I look older than you do now.
I wouldn't go that far, but you're catching up. You're catching up.
I
I
am. I
appreciate
am.
that because you
I
were
am.
like 12 when we first started working together. So.
Dan, it's good to see you. And, unfortunately, the reason I brought you on is because things are haywire at GSA, and you're the, a former GSA administrator. It's been how many years has it been since you've been in that role? Almost a decade.
Has it been a decade? Yeah, I left in 2015. So
Yeah.
a decade. How about
Yeah.
that?
And you were, during that time, you were the administrator when 18F was founded. And that's what we want to talk about, because last weekend, in the middle of the night, news came out. It had a target on its back. We understood based on some tweets from Elon Musk, but it was closed, and everybody was let know that, immediately, effectively, they were no longer members of 18F. So I wanted to get your perspective, your thoughts, having been, the founding administrator of 18F back in the day. What was your reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, we launched 18F during my GSA reign of terror to try to give government agencies a little bit of additional expertise and horsepower in making the decisions necessary to make consequential and substantial investments in technology. The original idea was something more of an internal management consulting um, um, team, and the issues we'd have with healthcare.gov, the emergence of USDS right around the same time, it pivoted more and more kind of harder into being a technology developer and supporter, right? So building some stuff, having people who know how to build things was really important. Having them build minimally viable products and then helping agencies figure out how to scale them. They really developed a talent for helping agencies demystify technology investments. And as I said, when I was, sad to learn that they had been just unceremoniously shut down, that they really built a fan base in the agencies who deeply appreciated them. I think they frustrated contracting officials who just liked writing these big long specifications and having PMO organizations set up, and then I think they were really threatening to the contractor community, who suddenly had someone on the other side of the table who could go toe to toe with them about what requirements were and what systems we would use and what language we would write programs in, and making sure that the government owned the data and that APIs were well developed so that people could access it. There was a real deep there was a real deep philosophy behind the work that they were doing, a real deep sense of intentionality, and a real deep commitment to delivering the best possible outcome for the American taxpayer. So, needless to say, I was disappointed and actually kind of surprised, maybe naively surprised, that they would in fact be targeted.
Yeah, a little bit shocking. You mentioned some of the reasons why you felt and you helped create this organization. And I should mention that, healthcare.gov and some of the other things that went on, there were other organizations too that popped up. USDS, US Digital Service, was another that is not totally closed, but is not the same as it once was now. Well, actually,
it is now the US Doge service.
Yeah, which is about as 180 as you might get. But
and maybe that's the problem. 18F wasn't easily converted into, how would you convert that title into Doge something? So maybe that was the problem.
18 Doge. But my point is, what was why did it make sense for these organizations to be inside of government? I think you alluded to it pretty directly with the healthcare.gov and sort of that point in time when these things came about. But, as time went on, why did it make sense for some of these services to be internalized within the federal government?
It's a fantastic question. And, this whole idea, this whole motion around privatization and outsourcing is not a new one. And there is a little bit of pendulum swinging around these ideas. There's a whole if you really want to geek out, Google A76. There's a whole circular on what is a
Mhm.
fundamentally governmental responsibility, what is not, what should be bought in the marketplace. And for the most part, government had really evolved towards buying its technology in the marketplace. And I would not argue with anyone saying that that's a terrible idea. I actually think it's a great idea. It allows, in theory, it allows the technology to continually evolve. It allows the best people to get involved in the projects. But what happened then is that over time, because the procurement motion in government is so ponderous for a bunch of reasons, buying something for $1 million is as much effort as buying something for $1 billion. So there's this natural tendency to gravitate all procurement actions to the biggest number and the longest period of time. And so what happens then is all the benefits of outsourcing IT slowly erode because what you're doing is building incumbency and dependency on a particular product rather than on outcomes.
Yeah.
And even the methodology by which the government purchased IT, Jen Palka in her book really goes into it. Really thoughtful kind of discussion about how there was a real focus around this idea of building project management organizations and something called the waterfall purchasing method, which was all well and good in 1980 or 1990 and precisely the wrong way to buy things today.
Yeah.
And so what happened then is, it became harder for the government to buy the very technology it needed to service people in the way they expect to receive services today in the 21st century. And so what we needed to do is help build the capacity within the government to just be a better customer. And that was the idea. USDS was trying to teach the government how to be, how to think in terms of policy and strategy in terms of this purchasing. And 18F was really there to help agencies better understand that motion, how to actually buy stuff, how to build stuff, what does UX, user experience, look like. They were there to teach agencies to be better consumers. Look, the incumbent people selling big multi-year contracts for government specific products weren't in love with that, right? Because in many cases, what cost $1 billion could be done for 10 million. And 18F, has probably over its decade of existence saved, certainly hundreds, possibly billions of dollars by just helping the government be a smarter, better consumer of resources. So I would argue that that is actually a fundamentally governmental responsibility to help the government be a better buyer.
You mentioned some of the criticism. The contracting officers were sort of never big fans of this. Some people disagreed with the business model. I'm sure you were met with some of those, thoughts when you were administrator and in the time after. But sort of, how do you push back against those things to kind of make a case for why 18F was needed?
Look, there was a lot of questions about the fee for service thing. Was it covering its costs? There are matters of rate of growth, all those things I struggle with. I wouldn't say any of it was perfect. I can tell you, what wasn't perfect? The world before 18F.
Mm-hmm.
That was deeply imperfect. And I think what we've done is reverted to the status quo ante. And I saw that movie. I know what it looked like. It was wasteful. It was expensive. You had, deeply installed incumbents who could charge whatever they wanted and hold the government hostage because they owned the data rather than the government. There was no transparency. So I think that, there were critiques, but they were the kind of critiques that came from commission, not omission, right? Mm-hmm. They were the kind of critiques that came from people who were actually trying stuff and maybe not getting everything right. Or more often, they were the critiques of people who were identifying weaknesses in in the way things were being done, and that was embarrassing and frustrating for folks, and sometimes actually cost people money, jobs, and contracts.
Yeah. So I sort of bringing it full circle, some of the things you've said and thoughts that I've had already is, an 18F has this tech background, the Silicon Valley sort of style of work and background. The people often come from Silicon Valley companies. So it's kind of ironic that the DOJ itself would target and look to eliminate 18Fs, especially as you just mentioned, it's trying to drive efficiency, best value for government, which are purportedly the mission of the DOJ. So
yeah,
how do you?
I cannot explain it, and I don't think they explained it.
Yeah.
I don't think it's been explained, other than some comments about the theoretical political view of the organization. I present at the creation, I don't remember imbuing it with the other founders with a particular political view. That was never our case. In fact, it survived the entire first Trump administration. So I don't understand that. What I do think is that it's possibly that was another group of very, very talented, very, very smart people who could observe that perhaps some certain actions that were being taken were not as well thought out and strategic and thoughtful, or even particularly technically of technical merit. That sometimes you don't want people who actually know what you're up to hanging around, because they can kind of judge the quality of your work.
Yeah. So to kind of close with a tough question, 18F is but one of many major cuts across the federal government. It's a cut of the workforce. It's a cut of a program. We're seeing cuts in spending, and we're seeing GSA and others also push to cut contracting with some major contractors, consultants, and things of that nature. By all accounts, that's a big portion of what the federal government does, if not all of it. How does the federal government, a GSA, an 18F, or any agency continue to do an essential mission without some of those key mechanisms?
I think that's a great question, and I think we're going to figure out, the answer to that. Right? It's a natural experiment they're conducting here at some level.
Yeah.
I can tell you though, when I was GSA administrator, came in after a scandal where, during the time that prior administrator, some very embarrassing, unnecessary, kind of wasteful things happened. And we conducted a top to bottom review of the agency. It took about 3 months, right? So it didn't take years. We reduced our staff by, I think, close to 1,000 people, right? We combined regional, activities. We did stand up 18F as an outcome of those discussions, right? Because we realized that we had only been providing services around, core services around buildings and contracts. And to be perfectly honest, government services were moving out of buildings, away from contracts, and into the digital environment. And so we came up with this idea of a third service. It's now called the Technology Transformation Service. And maybe I shouldn't speak of it because maybe it'll go away next. But this idea that our platforms are moving out of physical places, moving away from being entirely dependent on other people doing them, and moving more towards this idea of digital, digital connectivity between agencies and the people they serve. We, in doing that, for the first time in the history of GSA, started reducing the amount of space we occupied, right? So we started not canceling leases, but not renewing leases. So we're shrinking our footprint. We shrunk the size of the staff. We leaned into technology. The simple fact is that you can reduce, quote unquote, fraud, waste, and abuse. You can make the government more efficient. More importantly, you can make the government more effective if you systematically engage in partnership with the professionals who work in those organizations and empower them to go find savings, go find opportunity, and go find ways to do what they signed up to do when they committed their careers to public service, which is serve the American people in the most effective way possible. And I I hope maybe there will be an ability for these folks to come back together and realize that their most valuable and precious resource are those talented people who've committed their careers to doing this work. I'm going to hold out hope for that.
Dan, it's been great catching up with you. Hopefully we can do this more regularly in the future. But
yeah, I missed you, Billy.
Yeah, I missed you as well. We'll have to get Danny back.
Right.
Gov actually reunion at some point. But until then, it's been great catching up.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out, and I just want to express my deep appreciation for all those people who are serving and have served this incredible country. I'm sorry what folks are going through, and I hope we can find a way to overcome some of those challenges and get back to the effort of serving this country.
For more on GSA's federal tech mission, visit FedScoop.com. The Daily Scoop podcast is available on all podcast platforms. If you've already rated the podcast on your platform of choice, thanks so much. High ratings and good reviews of the show help more people find it. The Daily Scoop podcast is a production of the Scoop News Group in Washington, D.C. Adam Butler and Carlin Fisher help put the show together, and the entire Scoop News Group team contributes. We'll be back next week with brand new episodes. Until then, I'm your host, Billy Mitchell. Thanks so much for listening.